The kingdom of Valegrim sat at the edge of a forest so dark that birds refused to fly over it. Beyond the trees stood a castle of black stone, and inside that castle lived a creature the villagers called the Monster King. No one knew his real name anymore. They only knew the stories. 7 feet of scarred skin, curling horns, and eyes that glowed like dying embers. They said he had crushed an entire army with his bare hands. They said anyone who looked into his eyes lost their voice forever. Mothers used his name to frighten children into finishing their chores, and no one, not even the bravest hunter, dared step past the tree line after dark. Elira Voss did not believe every story she heard. She lived in Hollow Creek, a small village on the edge of the cursed forest, where she worked as an apprentice to the village healer. She had grown up parentless, raised by neighbors who fed her out of duty rather than love, and she had learned early that fear rarely told the whole truth. Fear was loud. Truth was usually quieter. That year, the crops failed. The wheat turned brown before it ripened. The wells ran shallow, and children in Hollow Creek went to bed with empty stomachs. The village elders grew desperate. They remembered an old custom, one that had not been used in a generation. When the land suffered, a tribute was sent into the forest to appease the king. No one truly believed it would work, but desperation makes people reach for anything, even superstition. The elders chose Elira. She had no family to protest, no husband to argue on her behalf, and some of the elders quietly admitted they thought her strange enough that the forest might simply keep her. She did not cry when they told her. She only nodded, packed a small bag with bandages, dried herbs, and a water flask, and walked toward the trees the next morning, while the village watched from a safe distance, holding their breath as if she were already gone. The forest was quieter than she expected. No monstrous roars, no shadows leaping from the trees, only the crunch of leaves beneath her boots, and the occasional call of a distant owl. She walked for hours, half expecting to be devoured at any moment, until she came upon a clearing where moonlight fell through a gap in the canopy. There, slumped against a boulder, was the king. He was enormous, exactly as the stories described, with horns curving back from his head and skin marked with old scars. But what struck her first was not his size. It was the wound across his side, deep and still bleeding, staining the ground beneath him dark. His breathing was ragged, his glowing eyes were dimmed with pain. Elira's first instinct was not fear. It was the instinct of a healer who had spent years cleaning wounds and setting bones. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. The king's eyes snapped open. A low growl rattled in his chest, and for a moment, she thought this was the end, that she would become another story told to frighten children. But she did not run. She knelt beside him instead, hands raised to show she carried no weapon. "You're hurt," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let me help." He stared at her as if she had spoken in a language he did not understand. No one had ever offered him help. No one had ever come close enough to try. His clawed hand twitched toward her, not to strike, but almost as if he did not know what else to do with it. "Leave," he finally said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "Before I forget myself." "You won't hurt me," Elira said, though she had no proof of this at all. "You're too weak to try, and I don't think you want to." She did not wait for permission. She opened her bag, pulled out clean cloth, and began cleaning the wound with the same careful hands she used on frightened children and stubborn old farmers back home. The king watched her, tense at first, muscles coiled, as if he expected her touch to be a trick. But her hands were gentle, and slowly, his shoulders eased. By the time she finished bandaging the wound, the sky had begun to lighten. She realized she had spent the entire night in the presence of the creature every villager feared, and she was still breathing, still whole. "What attacked you?" she asked. "A blight beast," he said. "It came from the far hills. It has been killing livestock, poisoning streams. I have been trying to stop it before it reaches your village." Elira blinked. "The village blames you for the failed crops. They think you're punishing us." Something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like sadness. "I have spent years trying to protect this land from what truly threatens it. It seems easier for people to fear what they can see than to search for what hides." She left before sunrise, promising nothing, but she found herself thinking about him all day, about the wound, about the sadness in his voice. When she returned to Hollow Creek and reported that she was alive and unharmed, the villagers stared at her as though she had returned from the dead. She did not tell them everything. She only said the king had not touched her. That should have been the end of it. But 3 days later, worried the wound might reopen, she packed her bag again and walked back into the forest. He was waiting near the same clearing, as if he had known she would come. This time he did not growl or warn her away. He simply watched her approach, something unreadable in his glowing eyes. "You came back," he said. "I wanted to check on your wound," she said. "That's all." It was not all, and they both seemed to know it, though neither said so aloud. Over the following weeks, her visits became a quiet habit. She brought herbs for his wound, and later, simply because she wanted to. She learned that his name was Draven, a name he had not spoken to anyone in years. She learned that he had once been fully human, the second son of a royal bloodline cursed by a rival house generations ago. A curse meant to punish his ancestors by turning the family's heirs into monsters in the eyes of the world. Draven had inherited that curse the day he was crowned king, transforming within hours of taking the throne, his human court exiling him to the edge of the kingdom out of horror and shame. "The curse feeds on fear," he told her one evening, as she sat across from him, a small fire crackling between them. "The more people fear me, the stronger its hold becomes. I stopped visiting the villages years ago because every scream, every door slammed shut, made it worse. I thought isolation would weaken it. Instead, the fear simply grew from a distance, fed by stories no one bothered to question." "That's cruel," Alira said quietly. "You've been trying to protect people who believe the worst of you." "It doesn't matter what I do," he said. "The court that once served my family still profits from my exile. As long as I remain a monster to be feared, they keep control of the kingdom's decisions in my name. A frightened king is an easy king to rule from the shadows." Alira felt anger rise in her chest, sharp and unfamiliar. "Then people deserve to know the truth." "Truth rarely wins against fear," Draven said. "Not quickly, and not without cost." Despite his warning, something had already begun to change between them, slow and quiet, as the changing of seasons. Alira stopped seeing him as the Monster King, and started seeing him simply as Draven, a man burdened by a curse he never asked for, doing his best to protect a kingdom that had turned its back on him. And Draven, who had spent years believing he was undeserving of kindness, found himself waiting for her visits with something dangerously close to hope. He never touched her without asking. He never let his temper show, even when the pain of old wounds made him irritable. And slowly, his trembling hands, which shook whenever emotion threatened to overwhelm him, a side effect of the curse tightening its grip during moments of feeling, began to still whenever she was near. But their quiet world could not stay hidden forever. One of the king's advisors, a nobleman named Corvin Ashworth who had grown wealthy managing the kingdom's affairs during Draven's exile, discovered Alira's visits through a soldier stationed near the forest's edge. Corvin understood immediately what this meant. If the king found comfort, if his temper settled, if the villagers ever learned the truth about the curse and the real threat lurking in the hills, his own position of power would crumble. He needed the king feared, not understood. Corvin acted quickly. He spread word through Hollow Creek that the healer's apprentice had been seen consorting with dark forces in the forest, whispering that she might be plotting against the crown, perhaps even helping the Monster King plan an attack on the very village that had offered her as tribute. Fear, once again, proved louder than truth. Within days, soldiers arrived at Hollow Creek and took Alira into custody, dragging her toward the castle to stand trial before the king himself. Exactly as Corvin intended, certain that Draven's anger, once provoked, would either destroy her or destroy what little control he had left over his own curse. When Alira was brought into the throne room in chains, Draven rose from his seat immediately, his amber eyes flashing with something between fury and fear. "Release her," he said, his voice shaking the stone walls. Corvin stepped forward, feigning concern. "Your Majesty, she has been meeting you in secret. Who knows what she has told the village, or what she plans against the throne? The people are already afraid. This will only confirm their fears if it becomes known you protected her instead of punishing her. She has done nothing, Draven said, his hands beginning to tremble, the old sign of the curse tightening its hold as his emotions surged. She saved my life. She has never once brought me anything but kindness. Kindness, Corvin repeated, almost mockingly, is a strange word to use for a creature like yourself, Your Majesty. The words landed like a blow. Draven's claws dug into the arm of his throne, his breathing growing heavier, the curse pulling at the edges of his control, exactly as it always did when shame and rage rose together inside him. The court watched, some in horror, some in anticipation, waiting to see the Monster King finally lose himself completely, proving every story true. Alira, still in chains, looked at him, not with fear, but with something steady and certain. She did not wait for permission. She stepped forward, guards too stunned to stop her, and crossed the distance between them until she stood directly before the throne. "I am not afraid of you," she said, loud enough for the entire court to hear. "I never was." She reached out and took his trembling clawed hand in both of hers. Silence fell over the throne room. Every noble, every guard, every servant watched, waiting for something terrible to happen, waiting for the king's rage to finally break loose the way the stories always promised it would. Instead, his hand stopped trembling. The tension in his shoulders eased. The wild glow in his eyes softened into something closer to warmth. For the first time in years, in front of everyone who had ever feared him, Draven felt the curse's grip loosen, not because of strength or violence, but because one person had chosen him without flinching, without doubt. In the very moment, fear should have made her run. "You see," Alira said, turning to face the stunned court, her voice steady despite the chains still on her wrists. "He was never the monster you were told to fear. He has spent years protecting this kingdom from real danger, while men like Corvin used your fear to protect their own power." Draven, finding his voice again, ordered the guards to remove her chains himself, his tone commanding in a way the court had never heard from him before. He turned to Corvin, whose confidence had begun to crumble under the weight of exposed truth. "You built your comfort on my curse," Draven said. "You let this kingdom starve rather than risk losing your grip on it. That ends today." With Alira's testimony and the discovery of records proving Corvin's manipulation of the kingdom's resources, the council stripped him of his position before the sun set. Draven did not fully transform back into the man he had once been. The curse still marked his skin and shaped his form. But its hold over his mind, its power to twist his anger into destruction, had broken the moment fear failed to control him anymore. In the months that followed, Draven reformed the tribute system entirely, ending the practice that had sent Alira into the forest in the first place. He opened the borders between the castle and the villages, slowly proving through actions rather than words that the stories had been wrong. Some villagers remained cautious, old fears not fading overnight, but trust grew where fear once ruled, one small act of kindness at a time. Alira never returned to Hollow Creek to live. She stayed at the edge of the forest, in a home built where the trees met the fields, close enough to walk to the castle whenever she wished, close enough for Draven to find her whenever the weight of the crown grew heavy. She continued her healing work, now welcomed by villagers who once would have run from her association with the king, and Draven, in turn, learned what it meant to be trusted rather than merely obeyed. The stories about the Monster King did not disappear entirely. People still whispered about him in taverns, still told the old tales to curious children. But the stories changed. They were no longer warnings meant to frighten. They became instead a story of a girl who was never afraid of the truth, hiding beneath a frightening surface, and a king who learned that the deepest curses are not always broken by strength, but by someone brave enough to hold a trembling hand and refuse to let go.